Welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be talking about excerpts from The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins.
Okay.
And it really ties in well with a topic that I think will be pretty fascinating for this deep dive,
Right.
which is all about how selfishness, at least in the evolutionary sense, can actually lead to cooperation in nature.
Yeah. It's fascinating how Dawkins makes this argument that the drive to propagate one's genes doesn't always lead to this sort of Darwinian free-for-all.
Right.
And it can actually result in these really fascinating partnerships and alliances that you wouldn't expect if it were just pure competition.
Yeah, so it's not just about survival of the fittest individual, but survival of the fittest gene.
Exactly. And Dawkins, one of the most interesting things he does is he kind of expands our understanding of symbiosis.
Okay.
Because we often think of it as this, kind of harmonious dance between different species.
Right, like bees and flowers.
Exactly. That's the classic example. But he says that's a very limited way of looking at it.
So he's saying it's not just about interspecies cooperation.
That's right. He argues that symbiosis is happening all the time within species as well.
Oh.
So you think about hyenas working together in a pack.
Right.
Or the relationship between ants and aphids.
Okay.
These partnerships develop because both parties are getting more out of the arrangement than they're putting in.
It's like a business deal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the currency is genetic success.
Yeah, but then things get really interesting when you start to talk about reciprocal altruism.
Okay.
Especially when there's a delay between doing a favor and getting something in return.
Right. How do you make sure someone doesn't cheat you?
Exactly. It becomes a game theory puzzle.
Yeah.
How do you ensure cooperation when there's a chance of being cheated?
Right.
And Dawkins illustrates this with his example of birds grooming each other for ticks.
Okay, so like bird A meticulously cleans bird B, right?
Yeah.
Getting rid of all those nasty ticks.
Mm-hmm.
But later, bird A has a tick problem.
Right.
And expects bird B to return the favor.
Right.
But what's stopping bird B from just flying off?
Yeah, how can you build trust when there's no immediate payback?
Exactly.
That's the big question. And Dawkins sort of proposes these three strategies that are at play.
Okay.
So you have the sucker, who just grooms anyone indiscriminately.
Okay.
You have the cheat, who accepts grooming but never gives back.
Right.
And then you have the grudger, who cooperates but keeps track of who's been naughty or nice.
It's like a reputation system for birds.
Yeah, exactly.
But which strategy actually works best?
Well, Dawkins, through these computer simulations, discovered that the grudger strategy becomes what's known as an evolutionarily stable strategy, or an ESS.
Okay, ESS, what is that?
So an ESS is basically a strategy that, once it's common in a population, can't be easily overtaken by any other strategy.
Okay.
So imagine a population of birds where everyone's a grudger.
Right.
Now, if a few cheats try to come in, they might get away with it at first.
Uh-huh.
But eventually they're going to hit a wall because no one's going to groom them anymore.
So the grudger strategy kind of self-regulates.
Exactly.
It rewards cooperation
Yeah.
and punishes anyone who tries to cheat.
That's right. And this actually leads us to another interesting concept.
Okay.
The prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from college.
Yeah, it's a classic game theory scenario.
It makes you question, like, what is rational self-interest?
Absolutely. You have these two suspects, right?
Yeah.
They get caught for a crime. They're put in separate cells.
Right.
And each one is given the option to either confess and implicate their partner or stay silent.
Okay.
If they both stay silent, they get off with a lighter sentence.
Okay.
If they both rat each other out, they get a moderate sentence.
Uh-huh.
But if one confesses and the other stays silent,
Yeah.
the snitch goes free and the silent one gets hammered.
It's a tough choice.
Yeah.
Because, like, you're incentivized to betray the other person,
Right.
even though you'd both be better off if you cooperated.
Right. And that's where the iterated prisoner's dilemma comes in.
Okay. The iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah. So here, the game isn't played just once, it's played over and over again. Okay, so you're going up against the same opponent repeatedly.
Exactly. And that changes things because now reputation matters.
Right?
And strategies like tit for tat start to emerge.
Tit for tat.
Yeah. So you cooperate in the first round.
Okay.
And then you just mirror your opponent's previous move.
So it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Kind of.
Exactly. And it's surprisingly effective.
Really?
Because if you're constantly defecting, you end up facing a wall of defectors.
That makes sense.
But if you're generally cooperative, others are more likely to cooperate with you.
So you build trust over time.
Exactly. And this was actually demonstrated in a computer tournament
Oh, wow.
that was organized by this guy, Robert Axelrod.
Okay.
He had all these experts submit different strategies
Okay.
for the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
And guess what consistently won?
I don't know, some super complicated algorithm?
Nope, it was the simplest one. tit for tat.
Tit for tat, really?
Yeah, and it won because it embodies these two key elements.
Which are?
Niceness, meaning you never betray first.
And forgiveness, meaning you don't hold grudges for too long.
Wow. So even in this cutthroat prisoner's dilemma world,
Yeah.
being nice and forgiving can actually be the best strategy.
That's what Axelrod found, and it actually has implications beyond just this theoretical game.
Okay, where else does this apply?
Well, Axelrod argues that this principle of tit for tat helps us understand cooperation even in really unexpected places, like the live and let live system that emerged in the trenches of World War I.
Wait, truces during war.
Yeah, I know it sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it's a perfect example of the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Okay.
These soldiers are facing the same enemy day after day,
Yeah.
just like players in a repeated game.
Right.
And they realized that constant attacks were costly and dangerous for both sides.
So they basically had this unspoken agreement.
Yeah, like you don't shoot me, I won't shoot you.
Wow. So just by interacting repeatedly,
Yeah.
they ended up cooperating.
And this idea of repeated interaction is key to what Dawkins calls the shadow of the future.
The shadow of the future.
Yeah, it's this idea that knowing you're going to encounter someone again influences your behavior.
Makes sense. You're less likely to cheat if you know you'll see them again.
Exactly. And this has implications for all sorts of things, from business negotiations to international relations.
So it's not just about being altruistic.
Right.
It's also about strategy and long-term self-interest.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another fascinating idea that Dawkins introduces, the concept of memes.
Memes? I know memes are more than just those funny pictures online.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So what did Dawkins mean by memes?
He defined them as units of cultural information
Okay.
that replicate and evolve in a way that's very similar to genes.
So like tunes, ideas, fashions, anything that can be transmitted from person to person?
Exactly. And
Okay.
just like genes, some memes are more successful at replicating than others.
So there's a kind of survival of the fittest for memes too.
Exactly. Some ideas catch on and spread like wildfire.
While others just fade away,
Right. It's like our culture is this evolving soup of memes.
all competing for attention.
Yeah, and Dawkins takes this even further with his idea of the extended phenotype.
The extended phenotype? What is that?
Well, this concept takes the selfish gene idea to a whole new level.
Okay.
Dawkins argues that a gene's influence isn't limited to an organism's body.
What, you saying my genes can affect things outside of my body?
That's exactly what he's saying, and he gives some fascinating examples.
Like what?
Well, think about caddisfly larvae.
Okay.
These tiny creatures build these protective cases for themselves using stones from their environment.
Ah.
So their genes are basically shaping the arrangement of these stones.
Wow.
It's like an external manifestation of their bodies.
So it's not just physical traits.
Right.
Genes can also influence behavior to manipulate the surroundings.
Exactly. Another example is this parasitic fluke that influences the thickness of a snail's shell.
Okay.
The fluke benefits from a thicker shell, even if it's a cost to the snail.
So the snail is unknowingly working for the fluke's benefit.
Yeah, and there are even more dramatic examples.
Like what?
Like the nosema parasite.
Okay.
It uses hormones to manipulate beetle larvae and prevent them from maturing. And then there's the Saculina parasite that actually castrates crabs,
Oh,
redirecting their energy towards the parasite's growth.
it's like these parasites are puppet masters.
Yeah, they've evolved these amazing ways to manipulate their hosts for their own gain.
So this whole idea that genes can reach beyond the organism is pretty mind-blowing.
It is.
It changes how we think about evolution.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, Dawkins also talks about why organisms exist in the first place. Why is life organized into these distinct units?
Right. Well, he suggests that the bottlenecked life cycle is key to this.
The bottlenecked life cycle, what do you mean?
Well, the fact that we all start and end with a single cell,
Okay.
Dawkins argues that this bottleneck fosters cooperation among genes. Because all the genes within an organism have to pass through the same narrow gateway, the sperm or egg. They're incentivized to work together for the success of the whole organism.
So they all have a shared destiny.
Exactly. And this favors the evolution of integrated, cohesive organisms.
So that's why life isn't just a random collection of genes,
Yeah,
but these organized units working together.
that's right. Even something as seemingly simple as our life cycle has profound implications for the evolution of cooperation and complexity.
It's fascinating to think about
It is.
how this single-cell bottleneck shapes the whole trajectory of life as we know it.
Yeah.
But this makes me wonder if there are ever instances where things go wrong.
That's a great question, and one that Dawkins actually addresses when he starts talking about parasites.
Parasites?
Yeah, they're the ultimate rule breakers.
Right.
They thrive by exploiting other organisms, often at a cost to their host.
So they challenge our idea of a purely cooperative natural world.
They do, and yet when you look at them through the lens of the selfish gene,
Yeah.
their behavior makes perfect sense.
In what way?
Well, if a gene can exploit another organism to replicate and spread,
Yeah.
natural selection is going to favor that strategy.
It seems kind of cruel from the host's perspective.
It does, but from an evolutionary standpoint, it's just part of the game.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that there's this whole spectrum of parasitic relationships,
Okay.
ranging from those that are really harmful to the host,
Uh-huh.
to those that are relatively harmless or even beneficial.
So it's not always a clear-cut winner and loser.
No, not at all.
There are shades of gray.
Exactly. And one interesting example that Dawkins gives is the relationship between fig trees and fig wasps.
Fig trees and fig wasps.
Yeah, you might be surprised to learn that the fig you eat isn't actually a fruit.
Really?
It's this structure called a syconium
Okay.
that houses hundreds of tiny flowers inside.
So when I'm enjoying a fig, I'm actually eating a bunch of flowers.
You are, and the only way those flowers get pollinated is through fig wasps.
Okay.
So the female wasps enter the fig through this tiny opening. They lay their eggs inside some of the flowers, and in the process, they pollinate the others.
So it's mutually beneficial.
It is.
The fig provides shelter.
Right.
And the wasp helps the fig reproduce.
Exactly. But here's where the selfish gene comes in.
Okay.
If a wasp lays too many eggs inside a fig,
Yeah.
it can actually prevent the fig from producing seeds.
So it's like the wasp is cheating.
Yeah, but the fig has a defense mechanism.
Oh, right.
It can actually abort figs that have too many wasp eggs.
So it's punishing the wasps that are overexploiting the partnership.
Exactly. It's this constant evolutionary arms race
Yeah.
to maintain a balance. And Dawkins suggests that what determines whether a parasitic relationship is harmful or beneficial often comes down to how the parasite's genes are transmitted.
How the genes are transmitted.
Yeah, so if the parasite's genes are transmitted through the same pathway as the host's genes,
Okay.
for example, through the host's offspring,
Uh-huh.
the parasite actually has an incentive to help the host reproduce.
So their genetic interests are aligned.
Exactly, however, if the parasite's genes are transmitted through a different route,
Okay.
like maybe through a different host or the environment,
Right.
then the parasite doesn't really care about the host's reproductive success.
So in those cases, the parasite might even harm the host.
Exactly, and we see this play out in a lot of parasitic relationships.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, take the nosema parasite we talked about earlier.
Okay.
By manipulating the beetle larvae with hormones,
Yeah.
it prevents them from maturing.
Okay.
This allows the parasite to feed on a larger host,
Right.
but it comes at a cost to the beetle.
So evolution isn't always about cooperation and mutual benefit.
Right. Sometimes it's about ruthless exploitation.
It's a tough world out there.
It is, but even in cases of exploitation,
Yeah.
there's often an incredible level of sophistication involved.
Really?
Parasites have evolved these amazing ways to manipulate their hosts,
How so?
often using chemical signals or even hijacking the host's own biological processes.
Like biological espionage.
It is, and one really striking example is the Sacculina parasite that targets crabs.
Okay, what does it do?
Well, this parasite extends tendrils that penetrate deep into the crab's body.
Mm-hmm.
They even go into the nervous system.
So it's taking over the crab's brain.
In a way, that's exactly what's happening.
Wow.
It manipulates the crab's behavior, making it care for the parasite's eggs,
Wow.
as if they were its own.
So the crab becomes like a zombie.
Yeah, it's a powerful example of the extended phenotype in action.
The parasite is controlling the behavior of another organism.
Exactly.
It's reaching beyond its own physical boundaries.
Yeah, this whole discussion is fascinating.
It is.
But it's also kind of unsettling.
Right. If genes can have such far-reaching effects,
Yeah,
are there any limits to the extended phenotype?
that's a great question, and it's one that Dawkins explores with the concept of rebel DNA.
Rebel DNA. That sounds intense.
He proposes that there might be genes within our own bodies
What?
that have found ways to spread themselves that don't rely on the traditional route of sperm and eggs.
Rebel DNA. How is that even possible?
Well, think about viruses.
Okay.
They're essentially packets of genetic material that can insert themselves into the cells of other organisms
Right.
and hijack their machinery to replicate.
So they're like renegade genes operating outside the usual rules.
In a sense, they are, and Dawkins suggests that some of our own genes might have evolved similar strategies, maybe jumping from one individual to another through things like skin cell saliva or even physical contact.
So I could be exchanging genes with someone just by shaking their hand.
It's a possibility, and if a gene can spread without relying on that traditional pathway,
Yeah.
it's not bound by the same rules of cooperation that govern most of our genes.
So these rebel genes could potentially act in ways that are harmful to the organism.
That's the idea. They might promote behaviors that increase their own chances of spreading,
Okay.
even if those behaviors aren't good for the individual.
This whole concept of rebel DNA makes me think about the nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah.
Like, how much of our behavior is determined by our genes
Right.
versus our environment?
That's the age-old question.
Is there even a clear distinction?
Well, truth is there's no simple answer.
It's not like a pie chart with percentages.
No, it's more about understanding the dynamic interplay between genes and the environment.
Okay.
Our genes provide a blueprint,
Uh-huh.
a set of instructions for building and operating our bodies and minds.
Right.
But those instructions are constantly interacting with the environment we experience throughout our lives.
So our genes set the stage,
Yeah,
but the environment shapes the performance.
exactly. And this interplay starts from the moment of conception.
Really?
The environment within the womb can influence how genes are expressed.
Oh, wow.
And that has lasting impacts on development.
So even before we're born, our environment is shaping who we are.
Exactly. And this continues throughout our lives.
Right.
The food we eat, the experiences we have, the relationships we form. All of these can impact how our genes are expressed and how our brains develop.
It's incredible to think about all the factors that shape who we become.
It really underscores the plasticity of the human brain.
We're constantly adapting and changing.
Absolutely.
But there must be some traits that are more strongly influenced by genes than others.
Of course, certain physical traits like eye color or height,
Right.
those are largely determined by genes.
Yeah.
But even those can be influenced by the environment to some degree.
So it's more of a spectrum of influence.
Exactly. And when it comes to more complex traits like personality or intelligence,
Yeah.
the interplay gets even more complicated.
It's not like we're just pre-programmed by our genes.
Right.
We're shaped by a multitude of factors.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful and mysterious process.
It is, and while we may never fully unravel this whole nature versus nurture thing,
Yeah,
the journey of exploration is pretty rewarding.
I agree.
This deep dive into the selfish gene has been fascinating.
It happens.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of cooperation competition and the interconnectedness of life.
I'm glad to hear that it's a testament to Dawkins' ideas.
It is, but before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I'm curious what you see as the most important takeaway from the selfish gene.
That's a tough one. But if I had to choose,
Yeah.
I'd say it's the importance of understanding the extended phenotype.
The extended phenotype.
Yeah, it helps us move beyond looking at individual organisms in isolation
Okay.
and appreciate how genes can have these ripple effects on the environment and the behavior of other organisms.
Right.
It reminds us that we're all interconnected.
We're all part of this web of relationships.
Exactly. And our actions can impact far more than just ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks.
It emphasizes the responsibility we have
Yeah.
to use this understanding of the selfish gene and its extended influence to make choices that benefit everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the selfish gene.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the surprising ways that selfishness can lead to cooperation,
Right.
to the mind-bending concept of the extended phenotype,
Yeah.
and we hope you've enjoyed the journey
I hope so.
and that it sparks some new questions and insights for you.
Me too.
But remember, the deep dive doesn't have to end here.
Right.
Keep exploring,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Uh-huh.
and keep those selfish genes working toward a better future.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas.
Yeah, it is fascinating to think about how this single-cell bottleneck shapes the whole trajectory of life as we know it. But thinking about all this cooperation that arises from this bottleneck makes me wonder, are there ever instances where things go awry?
That's a good question, and it's actually one that Dawkins addresses when he delves into the world of parasites.
Oh, parasites!
Yeah, they're the ultimate rule breakers. They thrive by exploiting other organisms, often at a cost to their host.
So they really challenge our notions of a purely cooperative natural world.
They do. And yet, when viewed through this lens of the selfish gene, their behavior makes perfect sense.
Yeah, in what way?
Well, if a gene can exploit another organism for its own replication and spread, that strategy is likely to be favored by natural selection.
It seems almost cruel from the host's perspective, but I suppose from an evolutionary standpoint, it's all part of this grand game of survival and reproduction.
It is. And what's fascinating is that there's this whole spectrum of parasitic
Good.
relationships,
Okay.
ranging from those that severely harm the host to those that are relatively harmless or even mutually beneficial.
So it's not always a clear-cut case of winner and loser.
No, not at all. There are shades of gray in these parasitic interactions.
Absolutely. One intriguing example Dawkins highlights is the relationship between fig trees and fig wasps.
Fig trees and fig wasps. Okay.
You might be surprised to learn that the fig you eat isn't technically a fruit.
Right.
It's a structure called a syconium, which houses hundreds of tiny flowers within.
Wait, so when I enjoy a fig, I'm actually consuming a bunch of flowers.
It is rather remarkable, and the only way these flowers get pollinated is through fig wasps.
Okay, how does that work?
Female wasps enter the fig through a tiny opening. They lay their eggs inside some of the flowers, and in the process, they pollinate the others.
So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. The fig provides shelter for the wasp larvae, and the wasp helps the fig reproduce.
Precisely. It's a classic example of mutualism where both species gain an advantage, but here's where the selfish gene comes into play.
Okay.
If a wasp lays too many eggs within a fig, it can jeopardize the fig's ability to produce seeds.
So the wasp could potentially cheat the system.
Exactly, by overexploiting the fig, but the fig isn't defenseless.
Oh, so what happens?
It can selectively abort figs that are overburdened with wasp eggs, essentially punishing the wasps that are pushing the boundaries of the partnership.
So there's this constant back and forth.
Yeah, an ongoing evolutionary arms race to maintain a delicate balance.
Wow, that's amazing.
And Dawkins suggests that what determines whether a parasitic relationship is harmful or beneficial often comes down to how the parasite's genes are transmitted.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So if a parasite's genes are transmitted through the same pathway as the host's genes, for example, through the host's offspring,
Yeah.
the parasite is actually incentivized to help the host reproduce. Their genetic interests are aligned.
It's like they're both invested in the success of the next generation.
Precisely, however, if the parasite's genes are transmitted through a different route, say through a different host or the environment,
Right.
then the parasite doesn't have the same stake in the host's reproductive success. It might even benefit from harming the host.
So the parasite might be more likely to exploit the host, potentially even leading to death.
That's right. And we see this play out in various parasitic relationships. Take, for instance, the Nosema parasite we mentioned earlier.
Right, the one that manipulates beetle larvae.
Exactly. By preventing them from maturing, it allows the parasite to feed on a larger host, but it comes at a significant cost to the beetle.
It's kind of a stark reminder that evolution isn't always about this rosy picture of cooperation and mutual benefit. Sometimes it's about ruthless exploitation for the sake of survival.
It certainly can be, but even in these cases of exploitation, there's often an astounding level of sophistication involved.
Really?
Parasites have evolved these incredible ways to manipulate their hosts,
How so?
often using chemical signals or even hijacking the host's own biological processes.
It's like a form of biological espionage.
It is. One particularly striking case is the Sacculina parasite, which targets crabs.
The Sacculina parasite, what does it do?
This parasite extends tendrils that penetrate deep into the crab's body. They even infiltrate its nervous system.
So it's basically taking over the crab's brain.
In a way, that's exactly what happens. It manipulates the crab's behavior, making it tend to the parasite's eggs as if they were its own. It even prevents the crab from molting, which stops its growth and reproduction.
So the crab becomes like a zombie, completely controlled by the parasite.
It's a powerful illustration of the extended phenotype in action. The parasite's genes are reaching out and controlling the behavior of another organism, essentially extending their influence beyond their own physical boundaries.
This whole discussion is fascinating, but also a bit unsettling if genes can have such far-reaching effects. I mean, are there any limits to the extended phenotype? Could our own genes be subtly influencing things in ways we don't even realize?
That's a very insightful question, and one that Dawkins explores with the concept of rebel DNA.
Rebel DNA? It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. How could that even be possible?
Well, think about viruses. They're essentially packets of genetic material that can insert themselves into the cells of other organisms and take over their machinery to replicate themselves.
So viruses are like renegade genes operating outside the usual rules?
In a sense, they are, and Dawkins suggests that some of our own genes might have evolved similar strategies, perhaps jumping from one individual to another through things like skin cells, saliva, or even physical contact.
So I could be exchanging genes with someone just by shaking their hand. That's a strange thought.
It might sound bizarre, but it's a possibility. And if a gene can find a way to spread without relying on the traditional pathway, it's no longer bound by the same rules of cooperation that govern most of our genes.
So these rebel genes could potentially be acting in ways that are detrimental to the organism.
That's the idea. They might be promoting behaviors that increase their own chances of spreading, even if those behaviors are not in the best interest of the individual.
This whole concept of rebel DNA is making me think about how much of our behavior is truly driven by our genes versus our environment. Is there even a clear distinction?
That's the heart of the nature versus nurture debate, a question that has captivated scientists and philosophers for centuries. And the truth is, there's no simple answer. It's not a matter of neatly dividing traits into percentages of nature and nurture.
So we can't just measure out a precise amount of genetic influence versus environmental influence.
Exactly. It's more about understanding the dynamic interplay between genes and the environment. Our genes provide a blueprint, a set of instructions for building and operating our bodies and minds. But those instructions are constantly interacting with the environment we experience throughout our lives.
It's like our genes set the stage, but the environment ultimately shapes the performance.
That's an excellent analogy, and this interplay begins from the moment of conception.
Really?
The environment within the womb can influence how genes are expressed, having lasting impacts on development.
So even before we're born, our environment is already shaping who we are.
Absolutely, and this continues throughout our lives, the food we eat, the experiences we have, the relationships we form. All of these factors can impact how our genes are expressed and how our brains develop.
Makes you reflect on all the different experiences that have shaped your own life. It's a reminder that we're not just products of our genes, but also products of our unique environments and the tapestry of experiences we've woven.
It's a humbling realization, and it underscores the incredible plasticity of the human brain. We are constantly adapting and changing in response to our environment.
But even with this incredible plasticity, there must be some traits that are more strongly influenced by genes than others, right?
Of course, certain physical traits like eye color or height are largely determined by our genes, but even those traits can be influenced by environmental factors to some degree.
So it's more of a spectrum of influence, with some traits being more heritable than others.
Exactly. And when it comes to more complex traits like personality or intelligence, the interplay between genes and environment becomes even more intricate and difficult to disentangle.
It's a reminder that we're not simple machines pre-programmed by our genetic code. We're complex beings, shaped by a multitude of factors, both internal and external.
It's a beautiful and mysterious process. While we may never fully unravel the intricacies of nature versus nurture, the journey of exploration is incredibly rewarding.
It certainly is. This deep dive into the selfish gene has been a fascinating exploration of the forces that drive evolution and shape who we are. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of cooperation, competition, and the interconnectedness of life.
I'm glad to hear that it's a testament to the power of Dawkins' ideas to challenge our assumptions and expand our understanding of the world.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you consider to be the most crucial takeaway from the selfish gene. If there's one big idea you think everyone should grasp, what would it be?
That's a tough one. But if I had to choose, I'd say it's the importance of understanding the extended phenotype. It's such a powerful concept that helps us move beyond looking at the individual organism in isolation and appreciate how genes can have far-reaching effects on the environment and even on the behavior of other organisms. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, woven into a vast web of relationships, and our actions can ripple outward, impacting far more than ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to encapsulate it. It emphasizes the responsibility we have to use our understanding of the selfish gene and its extended influence to make choices that foster cooperation, compassion, and the well-being of all life on this planet.
Couldn't agree more. It's a message that offers both a challenge and a sense of hope.
Yeah, it really is a remarkable concept to think that our genes can have such a profound influence on the world beyond our own bodies. It challenges us to consider the interconnectedness of all life in a whole new light.
It does. And speaking of connections, Dawkins takes this idea of interconnectedness even further when he introduces the concept of memes as cultural replicators. It's like he's drawing a parallel between the evolution of genes and the evolution of ideas.
That's right. Dawkins sees memes as those units of cultural information, ideas, beliefs, behaviors that spread from person to person, much like genes are passed down from generation to generation.
So memes are like the genes of our culture.
That's a great way to think about it. And just like genes, some memes are more successful at replicating and spreading than others. So we could say there's a sort of cultural evolution happening all the time with these memes competing for attention and influence some catch on and become widespread while others fade away.
Exactly. Think about a catchy song that gets stuck in your head and you share it with others, or a new technology that spreads quickly through society. Those are examples of memes that have replicated and spread through our culture.
It's like we're surrounded by this sea of memes, constantly bombarded by new ideas, trends, and behaviors.
Mm.
It makes you wonder how much of our own thinking and behavior is shaped by these cultural replicators.
It's a fascinating question, and just like genes, some memes can be beneficial while others can be harmful or even parasitic.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. What exactly do you mean by parasitic memes?
Think about ideas that spread fear and division within society or beliefs that promote harmful behaviors. Those are examples of memes that can be detrimental to individuals and to society as a whole.
So it's like a virus of the mind spreading from person to person.
That's a good analogy. And just as we have immune systems to protect us from biological viruses, we need to develop critical thinking skills and a healthy skepticism to protect ourselves from harmful memes.
So it's not just about harmless trends or catchy tunes. Memes can have a real impact for better or worse.
Absolutely. Dawkins argues that understanding how memes work can empower us to be more discerning about the information we consume and the ideas we spread.
It's like we need to develop a mimetic immune system to filter out the bad ideas and promote the good ones.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and being aware of the forces that shape our beliefs and behaviors.
Well, this deep dive into the selfish gene has been a truly mind-expanding experience. We've explored how selfishness can lead to cooperation, delved into the fascinating world of parasites and the extended phenotype, and even considered the evolution of ideas through memes.
It's been great exploring these thought-provoking concepts with you. Dawkins' work really challenges us to see the world in new ways.
It does. But before we wrap up, what's one lasting thought you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that even though the selfish gene concept might seem to suggest that we're all just controlled by our genes, we're not voice, we have the capacity for conscious thought, empathy, and foresight.
So we have the power to make choices that benefit not only ourselves, but also others and the world around us.
Exactly. Understanding the forces that shape us, both biological and cultural, can empower us to make more informed and ethical choices. We can be more than just vehicles for our genes or memes.
That's a really inspiring message. Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the selfish gene. We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have. But remember, the exploration doesn't end here. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep using your understanding of the world to make it a better place until next time. Keep those minds curious and those deep dives going.